Assassin's Creed is one of gaming's most popular franchises that has been running for nearly 15 years. Originally starting off as Prince of Persia Assassins, the game would later become a new IP. Many remember the awesome CGI trailer for the game, depicting the main character, Altair Ibn La Ahad, assassinating a target and then fleeing the scene by hiding in plain sight. Assassin's Creed then released on the 13th of November 2007 to generally positive reception. The game was praised for its innovative mechanics such as the parkour and social stealth, but was criticized for repetitive mission structure and a lack of gameplay evolution. But, with the game being nearly 15 years old, I think it's a good idea to look back on this game and see what created such a big franchise. Assassin's Creed has 3 different gameplay types: combat, stealth, and parkour. Let's start with combat. The combat in Assassin's Creed is pretty competent for the most part. You can attack guards and counter their attacks with some really cool and satisfying animations. You have 4 different weapons: hidden blades, which can instantly kill anyone with a counter, a sword, which is the standard combat weapon that Altair uses for fighting, a dagger, which is faster than the sword but does less damage and allows you to throw knives, and your fists, which allow you to disarm enemies, leaving them out in the open. Enemies are pretty aggressive and attack with fast and ferociously, so the game can be challenging if you don't get the hang of dodging and countering. They can counter your attacks and even stun attack you, so they can be pretty difficult to deal with. There are a few cool mechanics in the combat though. For example, there is this really cool mechanic where you can chain kill enemies with the hidden blade. When fighting a group of enemies, there is a chance that one of the guards starts to fear you and does an animation showing his fear or him taunting you. When this plays, you have the ability to instantly kill him with the hidden blade when he would usually block the attack. You can grab enemies and throw them away into scaffolding, for example, which instantly kills them, and it also allows you to deal with other guys, though they can also grab you and push you to the ground just as you can to them. But you can counter if you do it at the right time. The combat in this game is pretty fun, and the enemies do pose an interesting challenge, especially when you're surrounded by a good few of them, and their aggressiveness can make the game quite challenging. But the issue is how repetitive it can get. Yes, you get new weapons as you progress through the game, but there's nothing to them that allows you to experiment and do cool stuff. The combat at the beginning of the game is pretty much the same combat as at the end of the game. There aren't really any different enemy types. Templars take more hits to kill and are more aggressive, but they are just regular enemies with different stats and a different character model. So the combat, while fun, doesn't have much variety and does get stale very quickly. In terms of stealth, the game has some innovative mechanics with social stealth. Assassin's Creed is a stealth game, but it's not like Metal Gear Solid or Splinter Cell where you hide in the shadows. You hide in plain sight. Just another man in the crowd. You can use benches or blend with those who dress similar to you in order to stay hidden. It's somewhat similar to Hitman, where you dress up in outfits in order to look normal, but in this game it's more so that you need to blend in with your surroundings. It's a cool and unique stealth system, but the actual stealth mechanics are a bit bare bones in this game. You can silently take out guards with a hidden blade or throw in knives, but that's about it. But the game makes up for it by giving you multiple ways to plan out your assassination. When collecting information on your target, the informant will tell you specific details such as where the target is going to be, what guards he will be surrounded by, and what kind of response you can expect if you are detected. Plus, you can study guard routes, and if you save civilians, they give you some NPCs which can help you along the way to stop guards or keep you hidden. Now, you could just ignore all this and rush in with the hidden blade and kill the guy and then escape. Done. But it can be a lot of fun to plan out stuff like, this is where my target's going to be, he's surrounded by archers who can attack me from long range, so I either want to stay off the rooftops or kill them before they see me. I've studied the routes the guards take, so I know a gap where I can sneak in and out. I've also memorized the route that these blend folks take so that if I get spotted, I can leave the area and blend to remain undetected. I've heard a lot of people complain that the game doesn't explain stuff like this to you, which isn't true, you just have to pay attention. But I can get why some people might think the stealth overall is kind of crap in this game, because they're probably not the people who experiment with how to plan out assassinations, and are probably people who just rush in with the hidden blade, attack the guy, then escape. And if you play the game that way, then yeah, you're probably going to think the stealth in this game is kind of boring. But if you play it fun and plan out what you're doing, it's quite enjoyable. Even so, though, I wish the actual stealth mechanics, as in actually how you take out targets, was a bit more fleshed out. You could argue it's because it's the first game in the series and that's why it's not fleshed out too much, which is fair, but the actual mechanics of taking guys out still has a bit of a lackluster vibe to it. The final element of gameplay is the parkour, which was obviously taken from Prince of Persia. The parkour in this game is a lot of fun. You have so many different cool looking moves and ways to traverse the environment, and I love that the simple act of traversal is a fun way to play the game, and I wish more open world games took this into account. When you're hopping around an area getting from objective to objective, the game has a big adrenaline rush, and the fact that you can fuck up and fall and die at any time just from the slightest mistake gives incentive to learn the parkour and get good at it. So yeah, the parkour is pretty solid in this game. So the actual mechanics of Assassin's Creed are solid, but the combat and stealth could have done with a bit more variety in weapons and enemy types you face, which would have made the game a little bit less repetitive. The biggest problem with Assassin's Creed, though, is the mission design. At the beginning of the game, you are given 9 assassination targets. You go around the city doing tasks which give you intel on your target, and then you assassinate them. I'm not joking when I say that you do the exact same set of missions to get intel and then you do the assassination. The assassination missions in this game are a lot of fun, but it's the fact that you have to do so many mundane tasks every time before you get to do it, and you do it 9 times in a row. After the 5th or 6th target, you feel burnt out, but the game keeps going. And that's the biggest issue of Assassin's Creed. Repetition. You do the exact same set of missions 9 times, and then the game ends. This makes the experience mundane after a while, and it's why most people skip to the second game, which has far more variety. In order to improve this game, I would give the player more unique weapons and tools for combat and stealth, give more social stealth options, and give more unique missions before you do the assassination missions. Funny enough, that's pretty much what Assassin's Creed 2 did. Every problem I just listed with Assassin's Creed 1 is fixed in Assassin's Creed 2, which is why most people call this game a tech demo in comparison to the sequel. In conclusion, Assassin's Creed gameplay works competently, but gets stale quickly and doesn't give much incentive to keep playing. Apart from the story, which has aged really well. The story in this game is really good. It's not a character-driven or really even a plot-driven narrative. It's a narrative driven more by conflicting ideologies.
There is a difference, Altair, between what we are told to be true and what we see to be true. Most men do not bother to make the distinction. It is simpler that way. But as an assassin, it is your nature to notice, to question.
Then what is it that connects these men?
But as an assassin, it is also your duty to still these thoughts and trust in your master. For there can be no true peace without order, and order requires authority.
You speak in circles, Master. You commend me for being aware, then ask me not to be. Which is it?
The question will be answered when you no longer need to ask it.
The Assassin's Creed, who claims to fight for the truth and freedom, fights against the Templars, who seem to have the exact opposite mindset. What is cool is that the game is somewhat inspired by historical events. For example, the Assassins are based upon the Hassassin order, which existed between the 11th and 13th century. Though the main difference is that the Hassassin were religion-based, as they would frequently assassinate religious figures to further their beliefs and their cause, whereas the Assassins in the game are purely based on philosophy. Also, the main location of the Assassins is the Masyaf Castle, which fits with history. Now, Assassin's Creed isn't a very historically accurate game by any means. There's a lot of historical inaccuracies in this game. For example, in real life, the Assassins and Templars weren't enemies and barely knew each other. So that part is obviously fiction, but it's a nice mix of fiction and history as well as sci-fi that automatically makes Assassin's Creed more interesting than your typical game set in a historical period. The fact that this game is inspired by real-life orders and takes inspiration from events that happened gives the story a bit more intrigue, as the game is given its own interpretation on history rather than just pure fiction, which is far more interesting in my opinion. One part of this game's story though that has received mixed reception over the years is the modern day story, which a lot of people view as an unnecessary inclusion. Which in some aspects I agree, as the present day story never got an actual satisfying conclusion, and thus it just kind of feels like it's there. But at the same time I like that the game shows what the world would be like if the Assassins and Templars from 1,000 years ago still existed, and how would their orders function in modern society. The Templars have always wanted world domination in the game, and 1,000 years later they are still trying to achieve it by becoming a company that makes entertainment products that push their philosophy onto people. The Animus allows people to relive the memories of other people from history. Desmond Miles is the subject used to relive the memories of Altair. You can feel Desmond's panic as he is being held captive and forced to relive the events of his ancestor in order to find the Apple of Eden. They even tell him that they'll kill him once they're done with him. Lucy is secretly an assassin working undercover trying to help Desmond, and you get the sense that she's trying to care for him, but she doesn't want to do anything too suspicious. The issue is that there isn't much to this. I like the idea of a modern day story, but almost every scene in the modern day is the exact same. Desmond complains about being held captive, and then either Lucy tells him to stay calm, or Vidic says, "Mr. Miles, would you be interested in trying my new Viking game?" And then Desmond goes to bed. And then the game ends on a really shit cliffhanger.
Oh my god. It looks like... Is that blood? The hell were they keeping here before me? And what happened to him? What does it mean, I wonder?
The idea of the modern day story is cool, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Altair's story is interesting though. At the beginning of the game you're given 9 assassination targets. As Altair takes them out, he has a confession where he talks to the target in their last moments. They point out the hypocrisy and contradictory nature of the assassins.
And why these dark deeds?
Is it so different from your own work? You take the lives of men and women, strong in the conviction that their deaths will improve the lots of those left behind. A minor evil for a greater good? We are the same.
This leads to Altair questioning his mentor, Al-Mualim, about everything. The order of the assassins, his targets, and the Templars. It's a really interesting conflict, and by the end you learn that the assassins aren't much better than the Templars, and in some ways seek the same goal. He even turns some of his assassins on you. Altair placed his faith in the assassins and Al-Mualim, and was betrayed for doing so. The assassins even have this ritualistic act of cutting off your left ring finger to show faith. The hidden blade is designed to ensure that whoever wields it commits to the cause of the assassins, thus you have to lose a finger to prove it. A lot of people say Altair is boring because he's stoic, but I don't think that's true. He has an interesting character arc as he slowly becomes more conflicted and starts to question his actions and the order more as the game goes on. And even then, the story is driven more by conflicting philosophies and ideologies more so than the characters. Assassin's Creed has a really interesting story that focuses on a clash between ideologies, hypocrisy, and a man betrayed by his own faith with a mix of history and sci-fi. It's a really good story, I just wish it was in a better game. In conclusion, Assassin's Creed is a pretty decent game that has a lot of unique mechanics that are a lot of fun to play around with. Unfortunately, the game suffers from repetitive and mundane tasks that you have to do before you can get to the fun assassination missions, and the gameplay itself doesn't really have much evolution over the course of the game to keep it interesting. The story is really cool with an interesting conflict and main character that is constantly questioning his own faith and order, and the game has a cool soundtrack. I don't think it has aged as well as later games, and I don't blame anyone if they skipped this one, but I still think it's an okay game nearly 15 years later.